Welcome to the Cinematologists Podcast. I'm Neil Fox, and joining me, mono across from me in his lounge is Dario Linares. Hello, Dario.
Hi, Neil. I don't know, does mono not count when you're online? Or does it have to be? Yeah. We can't get our swords out and sort of joust, can we?
No, that's true. That's true. There's no...
or metaphorical ones, anyway.
Yeah. You can put those little emojis up maybe on the...
Yeah, that's it.
It doesn't feel the same as being here in real life, chatting about film and sort of catching up. So, yes, hello. How you doing?
I'm all right. I've just realised that I've got my wrong glasses on. I've got my reading glasses on, and I need my other glasses so I can see what I'm doing in two planes. This is the plight of the old man. But yeah, how am I doing? I'm good. I'm very warm. God, I don't want to do a weather report, but Jesus, it has been warm. This last week in London.
Yeah, and it's very different to Cornwall.
Yeah, what has it been there? Sort of 23s sort of thing.
Yeah, it's really warm
when it's like that.
But of course, because I'm right by the sea, there is that kind of breeze. And it is a bit cooler, so it's lovely and warm, but it's not oppressive. And literally, like, there was a few of us stepped off the train at Paddington, and sort of had to take a step back because it's like
it just hits you.
Just this wall of heat. So that was a welcome to London.
Yeah, no, and it's funny because I've actually been out in it quite a lot. So I went to Queen's tennis when it was just sweltering, and it was funny because we saw like two of the big names during the day. And it got to like the last match, and they won fairly easily. So it got to about 5, and it was at that point in the day where the headache from the sun is starting to form, and it was sort of 5:30, 6, and there was still one match to go. And I started watching this match. I thought, do you know what? I'm going to go home, have a rest, have a shower, and all that kind of thing. And then that turned out to be an absolute classic. That was match of the day, and I just thought, if I'd just waited it out, I would have stayed and saw kind of one that really got everybody going because it was such a close game. Anyway, first world problems. But and then apart from that, just this week had another friend over, my longest standing friend from Leeds, who I went to university with, and that was really nice just to sort of catch up with her. And we went to another gig, which is what we're going to do tonight. I was saying to you, 2 gigs within the weekend is like unheard of. Never in my entire life has that happened. So I'm looking forward to that this evening, and obviously having a chat right now.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, it's nice to be here and to be doing that with you. I was thinking about a couple of years ago when we went to see Squirrel at the South Bank. It was such a nice time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. And that's sort of the thing that has shaped this visit, this sort of flying visit, as sort of having tickets for that. But yeah, really nice to be here and catch up and tape an episode.
Indeed. I was just sort of thinking actually, because we've been talking about what, as we do off mic, sort of prep what we're watching, what we're not what we haven't seen and stuff like that. But we haven't had we're not going to do it this time around, but maybe that sort of where we are in terms of this year so far. It's kind of interesting because I was thinking to myself, I haven't really watched as much as maybe maybe I'm misremembering this, but by this time of the year, I feel like there may be sort of 6 or 7 films or however many, and you think, oh yeah, that's going to be kind of factoring into what I like about the year. But I was thinking I haven't watched that much, and is that to do with this particular year? It feels like it was just so static around the Oscars for so long.
Yeah.
And then I've seen bits and pieces. Like I went to see the Wes Anderson, which was okay. It was fine. I enjoyed it while it was on. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I don't want to be into the Wes Anderson discourse. There's not enough to talk about on that stuff. But I but there's nothing coming up that I particularly want to watch. I do want to watch some stuff that's related to what we're going to talk about on this episode. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But also because I've been writing so much, I haven't been reading either.
Yeah.
But because my circumstances are changing, and we can talk about that a bit more, but I feel like I'm ready to get back into reading more and carving out time and making sure I'm watching bits and pieces.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, where are you in that sort of scheme of things?
No, similar. I was sort of thinking about that and sort of look back at a couple of old notebooks from the last couple of years, and it's very similar, really. I watch most of my sort of year films in the last third. because I don't really go to the cinema very much to watch new stuff, and obviously in Cornwall, a lot of the stuff that would make my list is not coming to screens regularly. It's much harder. So yeah, it's quite common for me to have not seen much that's sort of from the year and then catch up and prioritize towards the end. Like I wanted to see, even just for kind of seeing it, I wanted to see the new Mission Impossible, which I probably will get to see over the next couple of weeks.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
Because it's going to play all summer. But I didn't see the Wes Anderson when it was on in Cornwall, and I fancied it, but it'll be on Disney Plus within a month, so I'll catch it there. So that's that kind of thing. And what's been really interesting in the last 2 to 3 months is, and I've been talking about, I finished 2 books. I read John Bleasdale's book on Terrence Malick for an episode, and I read Ryan Gilbey's book on queer cinema, which is today's episode. So the podcast tapings and interviewing people, that's what I haven't read two books in that succession in a long time, but knowing I was doing the conversation was really focused it. And then of course around that, I've watched a lot of Terrence Malick, and I've watched a significant number of films that Ryan writes about. So I've done a lot of watching, but it's very, very sort of targeted and narrow in that sense. And then missing other stuff. But so I saw something last night, which I'll talk about when we do a bonus later. Again, because sort of in town and seeing stuff. But there's a couple of films where it's like I know that they're going to be on the end of year list. Just because of the filmmaker, really. But or at least one of them definitely. Well, if other stuff pushes it off. But again, because I've been quite a lot of traveling, that's helped, seeing stuff on the travels.
Nice.
Not really seeing stuff. And I'm going to see 28 Years Later this week.
That's the other one. I was kind of like, it's on, I should really see it, but I'm kind of not rushing to, if you see what I mean.
No, and I'm sort of out. I'm out for like after work drinks, and then a friend of mine was like, "Do you want to see this?" And I was like, "Well, I could just." Do you know what I mean? Like it fits. If it fits, I'll see it. But that was not one I was like, I really need to see this. But I am curious, and it was interesting that the review I read the other day, I think it was a Science Hour review, was talking about Mark Jenkin, and it's sort of kind of a move to more sort of rural horror.
Okay.
So that piqued my interest a little bit more than I probably was.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I'm going to go see the F1 movie because I wanted to write a piece. I actually wanted to write a piece on that in the history of racing movies, race car movies. Because there was like the Le Mans film that came out, and then the Ferrari one. But then there's Steve McQueen and Le Mans, the old one.
And there's the Grand film Prix Rush as well.
Yeah, Rush.
I really like Rush. I think it's
So I think there's something interesting and I wanted to see it as well because I think obviously it's going to appeal to the Drive to Survive crowd. So I think it's going to be very different. I think to those older movies. So it might blend things together. Yeah, and then as I said, I've got stuff that's just come out on the Substack, which maybe we can talk about on the bonus because I'm interested to what your take on the cinema and education stuff, which I've just put out there. So yeah, this episode has been long time in the making, but then we had some news that came up which very definitely changed the circumstances of today's taping.
Significantly, really. So I've known Ryan Gilbey, who's written this amazing book called It Used to Be Witches, which is kind of part memoir of his life as a gay man through the lens of cinema, but also a really, really kind of beautiful survey through that lens of queer cinema, which he sort of defines and sort of talks about early on in the book in terms of why that term. But just, it's a really moving book, and it's a really kind of really raw and vulnerable book, but also just really insightful in terms of the form of what we might call the form of queer cinema and how it is a form rather than like a genre, and just covers so much terrain. It's a really and Ryan, I've known Ryan for a long time. We've been friends for a long time, and he's reached out and said, would we be interested in doing something for the podcast? I was like, of course, I'd love to. So when I was up a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, for work, there was an event. He was doing an event at the Barbican with a screening of the last film he talks about in the book, which is this Spanish film called End of the Century. And I said, well, let's tape then. So I came up and I went over to the Barbican, and Alex at the Barbican, the film programmer, sort of had put aside Cinema One for us to tape, which was just a really wonderful experience.
Nice.
Just in this beautiful big auditorium talking about this stuff was really lovely. And then Ryan did an event where they screened the film, and sort of he did a Q&A. So it was a really lovely evening. And then we sort of stayed in touch. I really loved that conversation that we had, and we also had a separate conversation beforehand where we sort of talked about what his book had meant to me, because I was really touched by the book, and I felt really validated in terms of where I'm at in my life and some of the things that have changed in my life, and I'm sort of growing to accept about myself in many, many ways. And it's just the way he writes about himself and coming to terms with himself, and was just, I just found it, I connected with it a lot. So we had this really lovely time together, and we sort of, were messaging backwards and forwards afterwards. And then a few days after seeing him and taping and sort of getting excited about this episode, he sent me a message with some just absolutely devastating news, where he said that he'd lost his son Barney, age 31. So in that moment, obviously, it was just incredibly devastating, and for Ryan and for Barney and for their family, and it just made obviously this a very, very different proposition in terms of this episode. And I didn't say anything at the time in terms of this, but I knew that this was going to be the next one, and didn't really know what to do. And then a few days later, Ryan sort of messaged me about something else, and I sort of said that I was putting it out, and I sort of said the plan was just to release it because it felt like a really meaningful conversation, and obviously it was, but didn't really know what to do other than that. And did he want me to say anything or just leave it and just put the episode out as is? And he said, he really wanted to go out, but he asked if we would dedicate this episode to Barney, which I'd said was an honor, just a real honor to be able to do that for Barney and for Ryan. So yeah, this episode is dedicated to Barney, and just in a tiny way grateful that we can honor his life, and on the life of my friend Ryan, his dad, through doing this. So yeah, this is a really special conversation for me, but also I know it's a special conversation for Ryan. And yeah, it's special to be able to do this at this absolutely horrific time, where in many ways the last thing on anyone's mind is a podcast about movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing really for me to add to that. Very honoured to do it. The conversation is absolutely fantastic. I think you really get a sense of the way that it did impact you, and the sort of the sense that you both kind of bonded over areas in the book, and that's interesting as well, because it is a book about kind of queer identity, but there are so many universal kind of ideas about experience and who we are and how we hide things about ourselves that I think speak to everyone. So yeah, before we get into the conversation, Neil, you just wanted to read something out which kind of will take us into that.
Yeah, thank you. I think being asked to honor Barney made me sort of think about what the shape of the episode should be. And we sort of mentioned that we wanted it to be a cinematologist episode because that's what it was, and that's what Ryan asked us to do. So wanted it to not be too dissimilar to what we normally do, but I did want to mark the honouring by reading something which Beth shared with me when we were talking about the sad news that Ryan had shared. And this is just a short piece by Denise Riley, which will lead us into my conversation with Ryan Gilbey at the Barbican. Listening for Lost People by Denise Riley. Still looking for lost people. Look unrelentingly. They died is not an utterance in the syntax of life, where they belonged, no belong. Reanimate them, not minding if the still living turn away casually. Winds ruck up its skin so the sea tilts from red-blue to blue-red. Into the puckering water go his ashes, who was steadier than these elements. Thickness of some surviving thing that sits there, bland. Its owner's gone, nor does the idiot howl, while I'm unquiet as a talkative ear. Spring heat, a cherry tree's fresh bronze leaves fan out and gleam. To converse with shades, yourself become a shadow. The souls of the dead are the spirit of language. You hear them alight inside that spoken thought.
¿Y estos quiénes son?
Ay, ¿no te he presentado?
No.
La tía Terrusé.
Ah, los espaguetis riquísimos. Que te vi caminando a la mañana desde el balcón.
¿Qué pasa, que vives en el balcón?
Sabes, tengo una sensación extraña. ¿Qué no te gusta?
Sí, pero tranquilo.
Siento como que ya te conozco desde antes.
Claro, ya nos habíamos conocido. ¿Tú estás casado?
No.
¿Tienes novio?
No, tampoco.
¿Has tenido alguna relación larga?
Sí, 20 años.
Joder.
Me cansé de envidiar a la gente que tiene libertad total. Extrañaba estar solo.
¿Y ahora? ¿Sigues extrañando estar solo?
Hello. Hi, Neil. Here we are in Cinema One at the Barbican, which I felt like the Barbican was a special place to you in reading your book. But being here with you, get the impression that it really is a special place for you. Is there any particular reason? Do you want to sort of talk about why this place matters to you?
Well, we're in Screen 1, which is one of my favourite screens to see a film. I mean, for anyone who hasn't been here, it's got quite steep. Do you call it rake? How the seats are?
I think it's raked seating.
Raked seating,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And it's quite steep, not IMAX steep, but it's, as you walk in at the top, you kind of walk down to the front row, and it's just got this incredible sweep to it, which takes me back to one of my all-time favourite cinemas, the Lumiere on St Martin's Lane, which is now unfortunately a gym box. But I had many formative experiences at the Lumiere. It had the highest walkout record in London at one point for Peter Greenaway's A Z and Two Noughts. And then that record was broken by Peter Greenaway's Cook the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover. But I used to always go and see films there that I was too young to see. Blue Velvet I saw there for the first time when it came out. And this is the closest thing to the Lumiere. Also, Alex Davidson, one of the programmes at the Barbican, he programmes these brilliant queer seasons, which he's done, I think, the last 3 years. And he programmed a 90s queer season the first summer that I was working on my book. And I'd seen an online copy, a really cruddy online copy of the African film Dakan, Destiny, by Mohammed Kamara. And then Alex programmed it in the season, and seeing it on, I'd already liked it when I watched it online, but seeing it on the screen, yeah, it just really opened the film up for me. And there are moments in that that slightly passed me by when I watched it online that just had incredible impact for me. Like when it's about two teenage schoolboys, and yeah, there's a moment when one says to the other, I can't remember the line. It's in the book. It's something like, "If God was fair, he'd let me bear your child." And it's so shocking and also so beautiful
Yeah.
all at once. And it's said with real anger. And I don't think that really hit me when I saw it online. So yeah, the Barbican's just been a place that I've had lots of great cinema experiences.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cinema, a beautiful room, and yeah, it also feels apt to be here, because in your book you sort of mentioned a conversation you had with Andrew Haid here at the Barbican as
I
well.
totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
Of course, it was in the Barbican canteen. Yeah, of course, I mentioned coming to the Barbican to meet him on a like rainy, desolate London morning in February. Yeah.
And you've already mentioned a lot of stuff there that I wanted to come back to in terms of the communal experience of cinema, and specifically in relation to your book, and Dakar in particular, and the director, I think, is an interesting interesting stuff to talk about. I wanted to start with pretty very early in the book, which got nothing to do with queer cinema, I don't think, which is the way you start the book is you get quite nervous and then you write a list. And I was like, oh, yes, I felt really, that was a real moment of thinking, sort of a real sort of empathetic moment, because I do exactly the same. It's only in the last couple of years I've really embraced my own list making as sort of a survival mechanism. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's such an interesting place to start in terms of what feels like across the rest of the book is a kind of ordering and a working through. So it's not definitive, but it is a kind of process of these are the things.
Wow, Neil, that's amazing. This is one of the things that I'm finding about people speaking to me about the book. I mean, I've been interviewing people for 30 years, but I've never been interviewed about anything I've been interviewed about films,
Yeah.
but not about anything I've actually written. So this is a process of, when you say that, it's like almost a process of, oh, I see, finding out what I actually wrote the book about. See, until you said that about I'm nervous and I made a list, I kind of didn't put those two things together, because just to set the scene, the book opens with me on a plane. Well, it's written in the third person at the beginning of the book, so he is on a plane, and to cope with the turbulence that makes him nervous, he goes through a list of the film clips that he's picked to show in the lecture that he's on his way to give, and he worries that too many of them are queer. And what will that say about him, and will the students think that he's trying to indoctrinate them? But yeah, the lists as consolation, that's absolutely something I do. I mean, yeah, if I'm on a tube train and it's stuck in the tunnel, then I mentally go through all Morrissey's solo singles from Suede Head up till whenever I lost faith in Morrissey. And yeah, that takes a while. But yeah, it's absolutely a coping mechanism. And the book is, yeah, hopefully doesn't feel like a list, but it was always my intention that not to go through queer cinema history chronologically, but hopefully by the end of the book, the reader will have an overview.
Yeah.
And they will have reached that overview through an achronological pattern, a kind of higgledy-piggledy join the dots pattern.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it amounts to kind of a list, but hopefully sort of thrown up in the air, cut up technique style.
Yeah, no, it definitely feels curated in that. I know it's a word that has, like a lot of words nowadays are kind of like not a pretty maligned reputation in some places. But I wrote an article about this recently. I think it's a really important thing that we do, and I think we do it a lot as people who work in culture, be that as programmers or critics or writers. I think we're always thinking through this thing, and a way of doing that is to put them, put examples of it together, which I think the book does beautifully. And I love the way it's not chronological, and it's not even biographical. It's just, it feels very associative. And I know that it took a while to get to where it ended up, which I'd love for you to talk about now, because it feels like there's an associativeness to it. So just, what was the process of getting to the point where it became the book that it is?
Well, maybe I should start by saying how I started to write it, which was Faber approached me to do a book about gay cinema, and I said, "Well, I'll do a book about queer cinema," and I didn't want it to be kind of from the outset, didn't want it to be narrow. And one of the first things I knew was that it was going to have to be queer in form as well as content, although I didn't know at that point what that actually meant and what that would look like. Um, I knew at the beginning I didn't want it to be like my previous book, It Don't Worry Me, which was about 70s American cinema. And it was simply an introduction, 10 chapters on different directors like Scorsese and Spielberg and Robert Altman, Jonathan Demme, people like that. And then a conclusion. And I'm proud of the book. It's just that I couldn't go through that quite sort of orthodox form again. It wouldn't have suited this book.
No.
So luckily I had just such a brilliant receptive editor, Walter Donoghue, who's a legend, has been at Faber forever and has worked with people like Wim Wenders and Peter Greenaway and Coen brothers, people like that. Joel Coen calls him a script whisperer. So he can kind of do anything and make your film better. Anyway, I luckily had Walter as my editor on both books, and he said at the beginning, well, don't worry now about how you're going to do it. And he gave me some quote from Francis Ford Coppola about something along the lines of, a film is a circus that invents itself as it goes along, or something like that. And you just hope it's not going to turn out like Jack starring Robin Williams. You hope it's going to be more like Apocalypse Now or Rumblefish or something, Godfather. But so I didn't know, and I went through all these like mad brainstorming sessions of like, well, obviously it has to have 28 chapters because of section 28, and but why? Throw out those stupid ideas. And something else that helped something that helped me find the form of the book was that I started writing it from a place of pretended confidence. Of this is queer cinema, and these are the films, and these are the directors. And there was just this kind of, it wasn't true to me. Like, I'm not a confident person. I'm confident, I think, in my film knowledge, just because I'm so passionate about film and it's been my absolute obsession. But I have a very sort of narrow corridor of expertise. Like, I don't know much about anything apart from films. I mean, I was just useless at anything like, history, for instance. If I have to review a film that's in some way historical, that's a lot of homework for me. It's not just watch the film and review the film. I've got to do a lot of reading around it because I did not pay attention at school. So yeah, just to go back to the place of pretended confidence, I had a kind of crisis because I knew I wanted the book to have a personal element, but in my life, my kind of sexuality, my identity has been quite complicated. I knew I was gay as a child, as a teenager, before I even knew the word gay, and then, as I detail in the book, I had 2 long straight relationships with women and had 3 children, and then kind of came out again in my early 40s. So I just felt I couldn't write from that place of confidence because I'd had such a sort of destabilized existence. And yeah, I was in kind of crisis about that for a while, or with the book, I mean, like, how do I do this? How do I do this? And then a friend was like, well, you're making it personal, so you need to write about that. And so it became that process of taking something which seems to be an obstacle and writing through that, like letting that be the prism that I write through, write the book through. So that's kind of how I arrived at the form. And then as I started to watch a lot of films, things I'd seen before, like The Watermelon Woman, or stuff that I was new to, like Take One, which is a 1977 porn film by Wakefield Poole, I realized there was this common thread of films that sort of depicted their own construction. So The Watermelon Woman is Cheryl Dunye playing a filmmaker called Cheryl, who's putting together a documentary. So we see her putting together this documentary within the film. And Take One is a porn film about the making of a porn film called Take One. And it ends with the premiere of Take One at a porn cinema in San Francisco. So all the people that we've seen in the film are in the auditorium watching themselves on screen. I thought, okay, well, here's something which is kind of analogous to the construction of queer identity, the way that you don't really have any precedent, or not as many precedents as straight people have. So you have to piece it together. You have to jigsaw together your identity. from whatever scraps you can get. I was like, okay, well, maybe the book could imitate these films. I could show the construction of the book, just as Cheryl Dunye shows the construction of her own film in Watermelon Woman. Another example is Jessie Dunn Rovanelli, who's in chapter 2, her film So Pretty, which is an adaptation of a German novel from the early 80s, I think. And it's about the adaptation of that novel. It's a film that knows it's a film.
Yeah. And I mean, just on that note, there was, there was so many examples in the book where reading it through the lens of a variety of queer lenses, be it gay or trans, particularly, there's the piece where I can't remember who's talking about Charlie Kaufman and Synecdoche. That just blew my mind to see it as a kind of trans masterpiece.
Yeah, that's the stand-up comic Jen Ives. Yeah, she put a video up of dissecting Being John Malkovich. And it's a very funny video, but there's also so much truth in it. She argues her case really passionately.
Yeah. And that was, just again, the opportunity to see all of this stuff come to the fore. I mean, it's interesting you sort of say about, kind of the lack of sort of confidence, because one of the things I found really interesting was how, it still feels like a process of becoming for you in terms of like this second part, this sort of second coming out and sort of who are you sort of, and you're putting yourself in front of people who you sort of assume or think or they say have a very, very definite understanding of their own queerness, and which kind of puts you on the back foot sometimes in an interesting way. But just, I think a lot of people could have written the book of being like, well, this is who I am now, and whereas you're actively having these conversations with people who are challenging where you're at, but also where all of our understanding is of a particular, identity within that spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, even as you're saying that now, I'm realizing, well, this book was never really about finding a moment where I become confident. Like, confidence is the wrong goal.
Yeah.
Like, I hope that the book has a kind of unstable feel to it, that it has a kind of drift. I mean, it does drift between third person and first person, so that's quite an obvious example of the drift in it. But this idea of, okay, I've arrived, I am now an out gay man. It's like, I don't think that's ever gonna happen. So I wanted to be true to the experience, not just of writing the book, but of being myself. And for instance, going along to an interview and maybe daydreaming about what if me and the interviewee got together, which happens a few times in the book, and which, if you were writing that as an interview for The Guardian or something, obviously that would not be relevant at all.
Sure.
You've got to honor the interviewee and that. But this I hope is like being true to the interviewees and to the experience that I was having while I was speaking to them. I guess it's helpful when you're writing a project of this sort of length over this sort of time to have some sort of guiding principles, or just some phrases in mind to kind of keep you on track. And in the early stages of writing the book, I went to a poetry reading by Mary Jean Chan, who's coincidentally another Faber author. And she was talking at this reading about writing from a place of frank uncertainty, and that phrase just like lit up in my mind. It's like, that's what I can do. That's what I'd already started doing without really, being able to kind of name it. So I had that in my mind, and I also had a line that I quote from Jenny Olsen from her film The Royal Road, where she says, "Experiencing myself as a fictional character has been a mode of survival for me," which for me is about cinephilia and sexuality and how we all perform roles, and that kind of also, I don't know if it led me to the idea of doing the book in the third person, or if it validated the way I was already writing it. I can't remember the chronology of how I arrived at that. But that idea of doing the first chapter and several subsequent chapters with myself as a character in the third person, I wanted to kind of take that. Yeah, it feels like it's embodying that idea that Jenny Olsen is putting forward in The Royal Road.
And it's, and that is something which I think is part of the tacit agreement with cinema, is that infatuation, that fantasy, that association, all of those things which we want to experience through film, and when we come into into the cinema space. And I am going to read a little bit, because there was a paragraph which really made me think about what we talk about a lot on the podcast, which is what is cinema now and what is it for, and what has changed. And there's a sort of a very short paragraph which sort of really brought to mind some of this stuff, which is, if I can see it in the light of film depends for much of its potency on the pleasures of sitting in the dark, staring secretly at strangers' bodies on screen. So no wonder the act of cinema going itself feels to him like a queer pursuit, with its connotations of transgression, concealment, voyeurism, the suspicion that there is something dirty down there in the dark.
I was actually thinking of not a queer filmmaker, but when I was writing that, what sprung to mind was, I remember interviewing Bong Joon-ho once, and his mother hated him going to the cinema because precisely that, like, she actually thought like it was something festering in the dark, germs and the litter and all that, whereas it was exciting for him to be
which is, again, it's as much about the space as it is about what's on the screen. And I wonder if, and you sort of touch on this a lot in the book, in terms of how representation or voice of queer filmmakers and queer people through cinema has been brought to the surface, as which has been great in many ways, and it is a different kind of conversation now. But whether as part of that transaction, in terms of culture, that cinema's lost some of that potency, because what was hidden, transgressive, has sort of been brought to the surface. So that role of cinema to provide sanctuary, security in the dark with strangers, is kind of lost when everyone's like, well, this is a gay film and you can watch it at home. It feels like that's, and I talk about this to students a lot, like one of the things that cinema should do is confront us. So you've got people going into these spaces who are confronting something which they don't understand, don't know, isn't even their own experience. But also providing a kind of, a security in the self by having that giant, kind of comfort of an experience that we feel very connected to. And that was something I thought was really interesting, in terms of particularly the filmmakers that you talk to, who the contemporary filmmakers are coming at this at a time when they're able to declare through interviews or through the films themselves that they're not hiding anything. This is not Douglas Sirk or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's Isabel Sandoval in the book. She made Lingua Franca, who says about the essence of queerness being something thwarted, repressed, sublimated, kind of bubbling up, and she uses Beau Travail as an example, and Tropical Malady, just these films that are quite kind of feverish. I did want to put the reader into the actual space of watching a film. I mean, I was very like the physical space, as you say, the cinema, or in one chapter it's me watching something on video with my parents and being horribly embarrassed because it's so gay. It's literally Tom Robinson singing "Glad to Be Gay" in the Amnesty concert film Secret Policeman's Ball. But I didn't want to restrict the book to just what was on screen. So as I said before about going along to an interview and maybe having some sort of daydream about what might happen with the interviewee, that's an example of film kind of spilling off the screen. I mean, because it's mad.
There's the DVD shop as well, where you have the little
exactly where basically the narrator of the book considers reconstructing the whole book around like a crush he has on the shop assistant. Like that's how unstable the narrator is. He's willing to just completely rejig the book, basically.
And the porn set as well. You take us on
the porn set. I go on the set of The Visitor, which is Bruce LaBruce's porn remake of Pasolini's Theorem. So these are all films, I mean, spilling literally in the case of The Visitor, spilling off the screen. Or there's a chapter about a film that hasn't been made.
I love that. Yeah,
Peter Strickland's film Night Voltage, which he's been trying for over a decade to get funding for, and which he really generously allowed me to excerpt a bit of the script from in the book. And also, and I'm kind of circling around the question here a bit, but I just thought of another example, which was one of the very, very first things I knew I wanted to be in the book, even before I knew what the form of the book was, which was the novelization of Damien Omen 2 which for anyone who doesn't know, a novelization was, they're kind of spin-off, like tie-ins for films, aren't they? And you would essentially, you'd buy them if you were too young to see the film, and then that way you could read them. And they were kind of like usually quite crappy novels based on the script, so they would often have stuff that didn't end up in the finished film. And the novelization of Damien Omen 2 had a fleeting cameo for a possibly gay schoolboy, and I fixated on that. And of course, when I eventually saw the film like 5 years later, when I was allowed to watch it on TV or something, or tape it off TV, that character wasn't even in the film, but he's still so real for me. Like now when I think of Damien Omen 2, I think of this kid standing on the touchline at a football game, kind of having a crush on Damien on the football field.
Which is interesting, because that would have been written after the script, and not maybe after the film had been made. So this is the writer has put this in.
It would have
in response to
it would have. I mean, how they usually work is the novelization is being written while the film is being made.
Okay.
So the novelization, I mean, this isn't queer, but the novelization of The Thing has a completely different ending, because I think they didn't have the money for the original ending, or Carpenter changed his mind. So they often do depart like quite dramatically. But I wanted that boy from Damien Omen 2 to be in the book, because he's so real to me still. Whenever I watch the film, I don't watch Damien Omen 2 that much, but whenever I happened upon it, I'm always like, will he be in it this time? Because he was so real to me. What I was going to say was basically it's nuts being a film fan. I mean, maybe it's nuts being any sort of fan, but there's something particular about the darkness, being together in the darkness, which is both. Yeah, I do see it as a kind of, I mean, it is an obsession for me, going to cinema, and always has been. I do think it is, like, at times has felt like what I imagine. Like, I don't know. It's a kind of madness, just how you obsess over things that, not just the things on screen, but you daydream about them and you put together films in your mind. But there's also, what's important in the book is the idea of film as a solace and a sanctuary. I'm going to quote Jenny Olsen again. She says in the interview, my interview with her, because she breaks down at one point, and I ask her, like, what is it? What's moved her? And she says, she said, when I'm in a movie, I'm okay. And that for me is like that. I don't know. It just made me think about my very earliest cinema going, and how I knew I was all right in the dark. Like, I didn't know then what was different about me. I didn't know. I mean, I know I write about, having a crush on Mowgli in the Jungle Book at the age of 3 or 4, and kind of kneeling up in my cinema seat and just wanting to be near him, and kind of feeling fizzy when I looked at him. But I didn't obviously know then. I didn't know what the word gay was. I didn't know then what that meant. But there was definitely a feeling of it's okay in the dark.
Yeah, it's a powerful. I think it's still a really powerful thing. It's still, I've been obsessed with it for a long time, as you have, and it's still the thing that anchors me. And I kind of, I need it. If I, just been really busy in the last week, and it got to the point of the end of an event I was running, I was like, I need to spend time, even though it's just at home. I need to spend time with a film. I need to have that experience.
What did you choose?
I chose The Big Knife, which has just popped up.
Is that Fritz Lang? No,
it's Robert Aldrich.
Oh, I've never seen it. Right.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it either. It's just popped up on a streaming service that I have. But yeah, that was like it, and it was that mix of this is a beautiful film, but also it's Ida Lupino, it's Jack Palance, it's Rod Steiger, and I was thinking, and it's funny because again, it's like
No Way to Treat a Lady. Were you going to say? Because he's in the book, isn't he?
He is,
and the sergeant, I think, as well.
Yes, yeah. No, but it was weird because like I knew I was coming to talk to you today, and then I just thought, this would just be a good classic movie to watch. But then I'm just it's bringing stuff into my mind about today, and I'm seeing things because I know I'm talking to you, and I've just read your book, and I loved your book, and again, it has done that great thing which a lot of great writing does, which has made me see things afresh and anew. And I'm watching this film, and I'm like, oh, this film is gay. Like, it's that he has this relationship with his previous, like someone who trained him when he played a boxer in a movie. It's about an actor. Jack Palance plays this actor who's kind of essentially, sort of taken hostage under contract by Rod Steiger's bleach blonde, slightly deaf, so talks with a very mannered voice. Studio boss who kind of there's this secret that that sort of kept him hostage under this contract. And Palance like is married, but then he has this really physical relationship with a boxing trainer who trained him when he was in a movie, who now lives in his house and massages him, and they spar, and it's a really physical.
Wow, I need to see this.
Yeah, and then and Rod Steiger sort of admires his robe, and he like slaps him on the butt. It's a kind of ownership, a kind of dom
Right.
thing going on. But I was just like, well, this is clearly and it's a Clifford Odets play. But I was like, wow, there's all this, and it does. It gives it a very both a kind of textual richness, but also for people like us who are obsessed with the movies, I'm like just thinking about the time it was made, what was allowed to be said, who's writing this, who's creating this, what are they trying to communicate?
This is the 50s, did you say?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. What are they trying to communicate to us through these relationships? And it was really, yeah. And I was just kind of invigorated by it. The film invigorated me, not just in terms of our conversation, but just what film is and what it brings to us, even when this is like a, probably not even a studio. I mean, would have been a studio picture, but none. It's just a film that I kind of known about and thought was about Hollywood, but it's not. It's about power and it's about relationships.
It sounds fascinating, and it's just it is a need, like you say, and it's just striking to me. Like, so we're sitting here in a giant empty cinema, and I mean, this is just more than I could have dreamed of as a child, to be sitting in a cinema like this, and then thinking to myself as a teenager to having written a book with the word queer on the cover, like, let alone it's about queerness. It's like these are way beyond anything I could ever have. I mean, I think something I've only realised since writing the book is that I just didn't take my queerness seriously when I was a teenager. I mean, I knew it was me, and I came out as gay when I was 14 at school, and I was lucky enough not to be bullied at school or anything, and I had really supportive friends and things like that. But I think I just never considered the idea that you could have a life as a gay man and, like, say, live with another man. I mean, I never even had the fancy that I would live with another man. Obviously, I was having like sort of sexual fantasies and stuff, but it was almost like, that just never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, there were two women in their 60s who lived next door when I was a teenager, and obviously they were lesbians. But even then, I guarantee you, I never ever thought they were, and just thought, oh, that's nice. They're two old. Well, they were old to me in the 60s. Two old ladies who live together. How nice. Like, it just wasn't in my mind, and I think that's part of why I sort of didn't trust my desires. It felt like straight relationships were sort of official and adult and proper, and they were also obviously like what would have made my parents happy. But yeah, it's amazing to me that as much as I thought I was comfortable in my gayness as a teenager and was open about it, was part of a kind of gay youth pen pal scheme and stuff like that, and would meet boys that way, like pre-internet. I just never thought of it as something serious, and that's really sad.
Well, and the mainstream didn't take it seriously, didn't give it that space. Where were the representations that were readily available, like Secret Policeman's Ball on Channel 4 or whatever, at that time, when you're a kid, that was saying, this is what it is and this is okay. So much of what a lot of the filmmakers talk about in terms of where they come from is that this is coded and has to be found. It still feels novel. And this is interesting about the criticism of film like Blue Jean or Femme, like any representations of, different types of queer relationship or presentation or identity or whatever it is, they're still kind of novel in terms of the amount. So they get so much pressure is put on them.
Yeah, Caroline Strauss from HBO, she says in the book, I quote her in the book saying, when there's only a slice, there's pressure on that slice to kind of serve everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why Blue Jean and Femme particularly have met with like kind of hostility or opposition. Yeah, George Oakley talks about a Q&A after a screening of Blue Jean where someone was like, why have you made this about a gay teacher? You should have made it about a lesbian in the army. It's like, well, that's your story. That might be a story you're interested in. You should go and make that film, but that's not this film.
Yeah. And I think, that's true. I always wonder if a lot of that reaction is just the knowledge that, that they're still kind of sacred. you know, and that
You might only get this might only be
Yeah, yeah.
like one of the 3 queer films this year. So why did you have to make it about this?
Yeah.
Why couldn't it be about my life? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not the person who objects in the Q&A and says, why did you make? Yeah, it's not their fault. It's
No.
it's the world and the culture that
Yeah.
they're being served by or represented by.
And Femme has the temerity to be a genre movie as well, you know, and which just
Exactly.
allows it to, well, not allows it, but kind of forces it into a liminal space where it's not a very clearly defined gay drama or drag drama, but it's also not just a exploitation genre film. And I think it does both things really, really well. I
Yeah,
mean,
me too.
I was really glad to be introduced to it. I found it an incredibly unsettling film, both in terms of the narrative, I think is really constructed, but also the dilemma of the protagonist, you know.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about what you want from films, and you want to be shook up, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to leave the cinema ideally the same person I was when I went in. I want to at least I want something to have shifted. Like they're the great films, I think, or at least the films that are to use a phrase that my favorite critic, who's mentioned in the book, Adam Miles Jones, and who you've interviewed on the podcast brilliantly, a phrase that he used about Gary Oldman's film Nil by Mouth. It's good enough to argue with. You want a film that's good enough to argue with.
Yeah.
That's the dream.
Yeah,
And Femme is.
Yeah, and just wanted to acknowledge that I was listening to a lot of the Cannes coverage about Pillion.
Oh yeah, the film of Adam's
It's Box Hill, isn't it?
novella Box Hill.
Yeah, which is a brilliant book. As most of his stuff is kind of brilliant. So it was so nice to see that story has been taken on. By all accounts, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I knew there'd always be films. Like once I'd handed in the book and had gone to press, there'd always be something I'd be like, oh, I wish this was in the book. I think I can deal with. Yeah, The People's Joker I saw very near the end of. This is Vera Drew's trans version of Joker. I saw that right near the end of writing the book, so that gets a fleeting few mentions. Even I love it to bits. But yeah, Pillion is the one I was like, damn.
Yeah.
If that could only have come out a year earlier, but that's fine.
I had the same. Don't worry. I think that's part of it, isn't it?
With your music book.
Yeah. There was 2. I was just like, can't
You
believe
can't get everything in there.
you can't
Leave it for the next person.
exactly, or volume 2, hopefully. So much. Where are we doing? Doing all right.
Yeah.
Sort of mentioned Femme there with like George Mackay, who you know is one of my favorite actors, and I don't know whether he is straight or gay. I don't know, but you know, one of the things that comes out of your sort of writing is very much in line with a very contemporary conversation about who gets to tell whose story, and speaking from the perspective that is your life perspective, and not, you know, and I think you mentioned very early on about, is it Dakar?
Dakan, yeah,
Dakan,
Destiny,
yeah. And that director being very, very kind of what's the word? And how that director kind of very, very stringently saying, you know, yeah, I'm not gay, but if we don't tell these stories, if we don't tell these to people, we're not, you know, how's the world going to learn? How are we going to learn as people? You know, we need to be able to tell other stories in the same way that, you know, queer filmmakers should not be expected to simply make films from a very, very perspective. But I think it's interesting given the way that the book, you know, sort of is written and all of the different sort of links it makes associatively in terms of filmmakers. That question is always there about whose story is it, and how, and what makes a queer film, and is it just the positionality of the person who's made it, or is it something in the aesthetic, or is there something, you know, what are the components of it, which I think is a really interesting sort of thing to think about. And one of the things that I think happens a lot is when you're watching the film, certainly for me, which is any kind of representation, I'm like, if the film is working, those questions don't arise. Like, I didn't question George Mackay. You know, it was only through reading the book that I did that, because in the context of the film, it's working. So I wonder why that question is still so prominent, given we're now getting a lot more examples of really interesting work, which seems to be a little bit undermined by that question.
Well, I wanted to slightly challenge that in the book, kind of incrementally and cumulatively, rather than saying this is queer, this isn't. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a bit in the first chapter. So the first chapter, the narrator, or rather, yeah, we're looking at someone trying to begin writing a book about queer cinema, and we get a little excerpt from the book that he's writing, and it says, "This is a book about queer cinema, but what is queer cinema?" And there, I wanted to slightly challenge the idea that there is a way that we can boil it down. A book that I mentioned a few times in my book and that was very influential and important is Vito Russo's The Celluloid Closet, which was, I think, one of the first and definitely one of the most comprehensive kind of stock takes of all the queer representation since the silent era up to the 80s when Russo wrote the book. There is a kind of slightly Santa Claus element to Russo's book in that, he divides the films into the kind of, these are the naughty ones and these are the nice ones. And, some of his judgments are it's a very important book, and I really respect Russo, and he was such an important figure. But some of the judgments are just so wayward. I was watching Barry Lyndon again yesterday, one of my all-time favorite films, and definitely my favorite Kubrick. And there's a scene there where Redmond Barry, played by Ryan O'Neal, steals the uniform and papers of a soldier who is kind of skinny dipping with his male lover, and you kind of overhear their conversation. Like one of the soldiers is telling the other one he has to go away again. Are you angry at me? The other one's, I could never be angry with you. And it's just a kind of lovey-dovey conversation. And Russo singles that out as some sort of homophobic or disdainful representation of these gay characters. That's not how I see it at all. I mean, it's sort of like showing, well, gay people are part of this world. This might be a costume drama. This might, they might not be the center of the story, but they are just an ordinary aspect of this world. They serve a plot function, obviously, but I mean, they're not made fun of. It's like, I mean, no more than anybody else in the film. Everybody's made fun of to a certain degree in the film, but and so I wanted to challenge that kind of naughty or nice dimension to Russo's writing, and to a lot of kind of, I think, queer film criticism, which is, these are the good films, these are the bad films. You can like this one does not serve the community. And also just to challenge the idea of a community. Like, queerness isn't monolithic. It's like there's so many. I hope that the book is sort of kaleidoscopic or fragmentary in the way that it just assembles a kind of multiplicity of viewpoints, rather than, I don't want the reader to get to the end and go, that's what queerness is. It's this thing that we can put in a bottle, because that isn't how I feel. That isn't how I define it. I don't know how I define it. And one of the things I was worried about, in knowing that I'd have to come out and start talking about the book and promoting it and stuff, which I was looking forward to doing, but I was slightly dreading the question of someone saying, "So, where is queer cinema going?" It's like, I don't know. Like, here's the book.
It's the book.
Yeah, could you just like pick through it and come to your own answer?
Yeah, but and I don't. I mean, I don't think you have to worry about that. I think it really opens up ways of thinking. And, I sort of said, I mentioned like the associativeness. I think, there's at one point where, I think in the theorem chapter, which I only saw recently, I think it was sort of the first time last year, I was mind-blowing movie that is. Terence Stamp is astonishing.
Yeah, he's hypnotic.
But how you kind of like, you're 1 minute you start here, but then you're talking about Billy Budd, then you're talking about Beau Travail, then you're kind of circling back. And I got the sense of this, it felt like it was layered. You get a sense of the time it took. I know it took you quite a long time to write the book, but you get a sense of, coming back and adding in these thoughts that you're having, which I love when I read, because it's you're sharing your thinking. You're not telling us what to think.
Yeah, part of it is that kind of, I mean, you say about us both being obsessed with films, and part of it is the kind of mulching down of decades of watching everything. Neither of us got a list of, these are the films you must watch. Presumably you, like me, just like foraged and went through found everything you could, watched stuff on TV when you were growing up, just happened upon stuff in a way that maybe it isn't so common in the streaming era. I don't know, where you select stuff for yourself. It's that idea of all these films kind of exist for me in the same sort of universe. All films do, and I'm so excited when I find a connection between them. Like, this is a very, very small connection, but it's something that really excited me when I realized it could be possible, and that is seeing 14-year-old Daniel Day-Lewis in John Sessinger's Sunday Bloody Sunday.
Mm.
He has like a 5-second kind of, I think it's his first film part anyway. You see him walking on the street. He's like this young hooligan scratching a car with a broken bottle. And that's it. That's Daniel Day-Lewis. And then realizing, well, okay, then 14 years later, he's in My Beautiful Laundrette, which is also set in South London. And maybe that character in Sunday Bloody Sunday grew up to be like Johnny, the National Front, ex-National Front thug in My Beautiful Laundrette. And that, just those little connections are so exciting to me, which is one of the reasons why the book opened, I think on the first pages or second page, there's an image of a dot-to-dot puzzle, which is something I used to love doing as a kid. You know, those numbered dots, and you don't know what the picture's going to be until you join them up. That's how I saw the book, how I wanted the book to be.
That works because I often, I used to love dot to dots as well, and I would sort of convince myself as I was going around that they'd done it wrong. There's no way this could possibly make a cat. And then you're like, oh no, it makes a cat, so that you're kind of in tension with the dot to dot, which has been designed. And I'm like, is this going to go? And then it does.
And because you're doing straight lines, it's always a very jagged cat, isn't it? The tail is like very spiky.
I don't know how to draw a cat with or without dots. No, but that's really interesting, I think, as well, because it gives you a watch list, but not from a kind of like, it's not a list, but it's introducing all these things, and again introducing them through your experience. But I trust your experience because you've been doing this for so long, and you have a sensibility, and you have a commitment to it, which I think is really clear. So I'm kind of like scribbling down, and I did want to come back to this, the amount of short film work that appears in the book, because I think it's really, really vital. You do this wonderful thing where you don't privilege, even in kind of a sort of subtext, which I think is common at times. It's not like, here's a narrative film, feature film over here, and then here's a documentary. So Nitrate, I'm wearing a Barbara Hammer t-shirt, like Nitrate Kisses it's not contextualized as being, it's over here as a kind of experimental. It's like, this is Barbara Hammer's Nitrate Kisses. In the same way, if the short films that are there's an Ozon short film, I think My Summer Dress.
It's called A Summer Dress, from 1996.
Last Address, the Irish sax film, which is devastatingly beautiful. And then, it's just funny, on the train on the way up, I was reading my notes, and I'd written down E+B, and then I had like all this, that was it. And then on the next to it said Brando and the Wild One and Spartacus. And I was like, what are those notes, and what does E+B mean? So I was kind of rifling through the book again, and there's the short film Ernest plus Bertram.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
but that's what the posters they've got on their wall.
The Sesame Street characters, Bert and Ernie.
Yeah, which is a really sweet and sad and very kind of interesting film about being outed and being in the public eye.
Yeah, Bert and Ernie being outed by Miss Piggy.
Yeah, a vengeful, bitter Miss Piggy. But yeah, just and again, the chance to see this work, and it all being gateways into new viewing experiences. Like I didn't even know those films, and now I've seen them, and they're wonderful. And I don't think they're lesser than narrative. I think that's a really important. I think it's really important as well in terms of what cinema is and what it can be. That you sort of did that.
It's all material, right? So I wasn't even thinking I've got to include lots of short films. I was just writing towards like my passions and stuff, and like Dyke Tactics by Barbara Hammer is in there as well. It was just very striking to me that was made or came out the same year as Chantal Akerman's Je tu Hillel, and they have, there's lesbian sex in both of them, but it's such, polar opposite kind of representation of lesbian sex. Like the Chantal Akerman is I think it's like 8 minutes, 10 minutes scene, and there's maybe like 1 or 2 cuts, I can't remember. And the Barbara Hammer film is 4 minutes long in total and has 110 cuts and is rhapsodic. Whereas the Chantal Akerman thing, she's holding the audience at arm's length. But also a friend of mine pointed on that subject of hopefully a democratic approach to the material. A friend of mine pointed out that a lot of the material in the book, or some significant titles in the book, aren't really necessarily even intended as films. So there's quite a lot on William E. Jones's film Tea Room, which originated as it's police surveillance footage from 1962, where the police were filming in Mansfield, Ohio, from behind a two-way mirror in a men's restroom. And they were, to catch men who were cruising, cottaging, basically, in the toilets there. And then that was kind of released as police propaganda with a very kind of homophobic narration on it and shared among police forces. And then William E. Jones came across this footage, wiped the soundtrack, so it's just completely silent. And he screened it as a kind of installation, and it became this really it's this really kind of magical and mysterious document of these people of different classes, ages, races, kind of meeting in this space for sex. And it's something that was intended as something kind of persecutory and hateful, has been like reappropriated as a sort of celebration. So there's that, which was never intended as a film. And what I write about Tom Robinson in singing Glad to Be Gay and Secret Policeman's Ball, I mean, yeah, that was intended as a film, obviously, but I'm writing about it from the point of view of seeing it in my living room with my parents. And it's essentially Tom and the song that I'm responding to. I mean, I respond to the camera work as well, the fact that it's mostly close-ups, so he's right there in your face. Night Voltage, Peter Strickland's unmade film, which I mentioned earlier, not a film yet, but still. So I was trying to like mix in all these different stimuli.
Yeah, and because you're a gay man who's interested in culture, so the majority of your work has been in film. But what's lovely is that the spillage again into these other things, both the future and hopefully with the Strickland film, but also not just the content of the film, but like the period that Night Voltage is set. Which obviously.
Oh yeah, we should say it's early 80s in New York's gay clubs. Yeah, just as AIDS is kind of creeping in.
So all of this stuff comes in through that process, which is really vital. Because when I'm reading a work like this, I want to feel that this person is just kind of following their sort of heart and and cultural passions, which comes across. And there's a great line that Tom Robinson says about Ray Davis, which really made me laugh.
About Ray Davis?
Yeah. About having a kink song written about it.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, because I knew this was happening, got about 85 more questions and 10 minutes to do it. But I think most of that has come in. I did want to I wanted to sort of draw back to kind of like what the book is doing. And one of the things I think it does really beautifully is as a work of critical fandom, where you're sort of spending extended periods of time really thinking about something which you clearly love. And I think maybe the most striking sort of example of that, which would be a good thing to talk about at the end, is Mike Leigh. Because obviously, sort of gay representation on screen and sort of, coded sexuality, coded queer sexuality is very kind of probably the most written about historically in terms of queer cinema. And the idea of absence, that you have to find something that isn't there. But what seems to be different about your work, the most sort of time you spend on absence is on the work of Mike Leigh, where you're writing about, and I think it says, why doesn't it interest him? And what's really, really wonderful about it is at no point in your really kind of deep analysis of his films and the lack of gay or queer characters within them are you ever sort of outwardly criticizing Mike Leigh.
I love Mike Leigh.
Exactly. And it's clear you're a fan, but you're also really comfortable. And I think it's really important to actually to go into that work and think, well, why is that not there? And what does that tell us about filmmaking, British filmmaking, or anything else? And I love that, because it felt like a really rich part of the book in terms of you wrestling with something that you love without being down on it or trying to even convince yourself that it has to be another way.
Yeah, we should differentiate between because for instance, you could say the same about the films of Ken Loach. But I differentiate in the book between it's Mike's particular method of working, which is that just briefly, he kind of works one-on-one with each actor in isolation, and each actor brings him up to 200 different characters or just mentions of people they've met. Sally Hawkins for Happy Go Lucky, I think, holds the record. She brought Mike a list of 220 people that she had met or come across or seen in a shop, and they whittled that down to 2 or 3 that they kind of combined into her character. So it's just the idea of, say you've got 10 lead actors in each of Mike's films, and they each bring him a list, and somehow somehow no queer person, as far as we can see, with a possible exception of Claire Skinner's character in Life is Sweet, has made it to the screen.
Excuse me. Hiya. Hello. Sorry.
Could you
Hiya. We're recording down here. Would it be okay to
just
we've just got about another 5-10 minutes? It'd be great.
sorry?
Thank you.
Should I just with the possible exception? Hang on, let me just take that. What does that sound? And it was almost because I love Mike's films so much that I wanted to slightly wrestle with it. Because his characterizations are so rich that it just started to look sort of almost bloody mindy. Why? And I would admit something that is just a kind of subtext, that is kind of subtextual in the book, and I don't want to kind of draw out. So I didn't want to almost turn it into a therapy session. But something that I realized after the fact was that me saying to Mike Leigh, why isn't he interested, is a kind of links to the bit in the book where I've told my dad that I've been to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and he's very critical of this. And oh, that's the sort of thing you're into, is it? Geezers in suspenders, fellas dressing like tarts, so which is exactly how my dad used to speak. And I say something like, I don't know the line. I say, I just wanted him. He wanted him to enjoy my enjoyment, like that. And so when I'm saying to Mike Leigh, why isn't he interested? I'm kind of saying the same thing to my dad.
Yeah.
And my dad and Mike Leigh are nothing alike. Okay, so Mike Leigh is like a little bearded guy. My dad is a big, like, Cockney bruiser. But it's sort of that thing of like, it's not even like, it's not a takedown. It's not kind of berating someone. It's just asking, but why? Where's the kind of, it's almost like a failure of empathy, it feels to me. And that's something that Andrew Haigh kind of talks about in the All of Us Strangers chapter, about younger people not kind of choosing not to connect almost with All of Us Strangers. Be like, well, this isn't our story. We don't care about the word queer. Because the characters talk about just how the word queer they didn't really feel it applies to them, or it doesn't feel like properly gay enough and stuff like this. And Andrew Scott's character in that film is very, because he grew up during AIDS, he's has a kind of wariness about sex and stuff like that. And that is not the world that most young people, or queer people, live in now. And Andrew Haigh talks about that as being I don't know if he uses the exact phrase "failure of empathy," but it is that. It's like, don't you want to go to the cinema and see experiences other than your own?
And again, that's what the Dakan director says as well. Like, about, I think, which is really, and it is really powerful. Again, it kind of roots the book very in the kind of contemporary moment. It also made me question just all of the actors as well, and not again in terms of like why did they not, but it's striking.
Do you mean Mike Leigh's actor?
Yeah, just that again, like how if it's not necessarily their lived experience, they're not going to champion it, they're not going to bring it forward, they're just going to let it slide without realizing that sort of cumulative effect over, because they're obviously there in, they might be doing one or two things.
He must have worked with gay actors. I mean, the example that the example that I use is Francis Lee, who has a very small role in Topsy Turvy. Francis, who went on to direct God's Own Country and Ammonite. So, I mean, the character that Francis plays in Topsy Turvy is not. It's such a small character, you don't get to learn anything about him. But there must have been people on the lists all those years that brought Mike. Mike's the kind of curator, the
opera and musicals, which again, historically has drawn more, more queer people to it than other areas. So
but I do absolutely still love Mike's films and love Mike.
Well, again, because I think it's really interesting what you're saying there, because it takes us back to that early part of the conversation in terms of like when we go in, we want to be seen. We want something reflected back to us in the dark. We want to feel that we connect, and queer audiences and queer critics and writers have talked for a long time about finding that anywhere on the screen, because it's not directly, it's in the corners a lot of the time for queer audiences. But I think that does hold for a lot of us in terms of like why we are going in, and when we don't get it reflected back, I think, or we don't feel it coming back, I think it does sit with us. And it doesn't mean that we don't love those films or we don't appreciate those films, but there is something, I think, which does, because we want that, like you want your dad to do you enjoy your enjoyment? You want him to see you. You know,
I should say he enjoys it now. It was just back then. I think he's learned to enjoy it through my incessant just going on and on about films to him. But yeah, it's weird. You just want some sort of spark, some sort of connection. It's not even like for like. As Julio Torres, director of Problemista, I quote him saying in the book, some things are not about you, and that's okay. You don't need to see kind of yourself in everything. And representation isn't the be all and end all. It's not like when you see queer people on screen, the problem's solved. That's homophobia fixed.
Yeah.
It's much. Hopefully, the book shows it's much more complicated than that.
It does. It shows that it's more complicated, more messy, but really, really beautiful and really, really powerful. I said to you before we started taping, but I'll say it again. I think it's an extraordinary book. I think it's the sheer rawness of your vulnerability in terms of putting yourself, not just as a kind of as several narrators, but in the positions in the book, bringing us into a space and sharing how you actually feel, when you're talking to filmmakers or other people, is really visceral and it's really moving. And I really encourage people to read it because I think it's a beautiful piece of work.
Thanks so much, Neil. Should we end by saying that we're now going to a screening of End of the Century?
Yes, we should, so that I can actually finish the book.
Because the last chapter of the book is about Lucio Castro's film End of the Century. And I think it's really lovely that you've chosen to hold off on reading the last chapter until you've seen the film.
I'm very, very excited to see the film. And I'm it's true. I should say I have not completely finished the book, but I'm going to finish it in my hotel tonight. And I'm sure when Dario and I do our bit, I'll be mentioning the film. Because, when I got to that point in the book and I realized that was going to be the one that we were going to screen or that I can't. And again, it's because you, through the book, had just evoked such a beautiful passion for film. And I feel I haven't read that chapter, but I assume because it's the last one, that film really means a lot to you.
It does.
And the chance to see it at the cinema, at the Barbican, with all of that context that we talked about earlier, just feels like this. I can't, and I've not seen the film as well. So this is how I need to see this film. And then I need to finish.
Great. So you'll reflect on it in the...
Yeah.
That's fantastic because, you'll see when you see End of the Century, there are things in the film that just fit. It means that it's a film that means a lot to me. And there are things in the film that I kind of almost wanted to sort of piggyback on. But I won't say any more.
Great. Don't spoil it for me. But thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you about this book and share this time with you. It's been an amazing experience reading it, and as always, a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Neil. It's a huge pleasure, and I'm a big fan of the podcast, so thank you.
Thanks to Alex at the Barbican, the film programmer there thanks to Alex at the Barbican, one of the film programmers there, for providing that space and time for us to have that conversation. And thank you to Ryan for just such a rich conversation. And we mentioned Adam Mars Jones in that, and I remember when we did the episode with Adam Mars Jones years ago, and Ryan and I talking about that, and just our kind of shared admiration for the kind of conversation that Adam had and is capable of, and it felt like a very similar kind of conversation where it's about what's happening in that moment as much as it's just talking about a book. So I'm really grateful for that conversation and time with Ryan. Dario, so you've heard that. Any sort of thoughts?
Yeah, quite a lot actually. I mean, what I thought I'd do actually, because I don't think it's necessary, because you talked in such depth and for an hour and really felt it went really quick, I thought, as well. But they're just like little snippets I thought that came out. I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. I mean, first of all, just setting it up in terms of the Barbican and that screen one there was really lovely, because. And you were talking about raked seatings, because I've got a piece that's literally been sat on my Substack for like 6 months that's about where you sit in a cinema.
Yeah.
And I just haven't found the right point to finish it off, because I wanted to go to a few cinemas. I like Barbican 1. I want to go back there again just to sort of get that. And I just love that idea that there's that sense of the arena then becomes the context by which your embodied experience translates what you're seeing on screen.
Yeah.
And there's I think, again, we talked about off mic that, for want of a better word, the intersection between your embodied self as a queer person being in the cinema in a darkened auditorium where you're watching shit that perhaps you shouldn't be, and the ability to do things that maybe you shouldn't do, in certain circumstances, but then also to see representations that either overtly or you decode as queer. I'm not queer or defined as gay or anything like that, but I can see that experience being really central, to that, to sort of formations of identity in that regard. Because I've read a lot about it, you know what I mean? It's when you do a film studies degree, that there is a sort of strand that you do engage with, I think, and sort of think about cinema in that sense. So that was really nice. And the Cine Lumiere sounds great. It really pisses me off when you hear about these old cinemas and then the next thing they're either with the spoons or a fucking car park, And I loved what he said about that idea of pretended confidence, because I think that applies to so many of us, and it's not even a sort of fake it till you make it kind of thing, because that requires the confidence that you don't have,
and the idea that you can make it or that you think you're going to make it.
Exactly. It's kind of like it's that sort of sense, I think, that at a younger age you can, I mean, let me put it this way. So I'm stuttering here because I'm trying to find a way into this. It's that thing where I think back now, I wish I could go back knowing what I know now and be 16 again and confront the bully.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, because I know that they're shitting themselves as much as I am.
Yeah.
And that now all the confidence and knowledge I've got, and that nothing around me matters.
Yeah.
None of this is going to matter in 20 years' time, So that was really interesting. And then the what he's talking about, the films that reveal their own construction. And before he even said it, I said, oh yeah, that kind of aligns with the sort of construction of queer identity. And again, I don't want to say that it's not analogous to queer identity very definitely, but also I think to identity.
Yeah.
We all try to find ways to construct ourselves from what's available when we're young and we're uncertain and all that kind of stuff. And the question of the cinematic spectatorship as being a queer phenomenon, I think is interesting. But when you pointed out that sort of sense that it's lost its sense of transgression, that's interesting as well, because I think it's very much a gentrified experience now.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about, there's a new Grindhouse opened, and then in London, which we're going to go to at some point. But then even that film we watched, which is an okay film about the Scala.
Yeah.
That sort of sense of going to the cinema, that it's not the same thing anymore. I just think there was so much of that sense of the experience of being in the cinema. When I'm in the movie, I'm okay. It's kind of an interesting sort of tell, I think. And like, even now, when I go to the cinema, I kind of like, I feel it's okay in the context of, I don't have to look at my phone. I don't have to deal with, fucking wars that are going on, or what's my sort of relationship to that, even though, I'm a privileged white person sitting here talking about movies, and is that really, who cares? All of that stuff goes through your head all the time, but then you just go in the movie and you're like, I'm just kind of okay.
Nice.
And that, obviously that conversation, which I'm not going to go into, but who gets to tell the story, is an interesting one. And it made me think, when he was talking about Mike Leigh, I was thinking about, there's a paper to be written or an article about like your favorite directors as father figures.
Yeah.
They're surrogate dads and stuff like this. It's kind of like, I love my dad, but I'm so disappointed by him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's all of that. And then I just thought, and in fact, I'm going to write this for the newsletter. So that, the next newsletter is going to come out in a couple of weeks. I'm going to write a review of Dakan, because it's available sort of online for free. I watched the sort of first 20 minutes and thought, actually, I need to pay more attention to this. So that's really interesting to me, because I want to write about something that's completely outside of what I would ordinarily write about,
Yeah.
and actually is not, because I think that that's interesting from a critical standpoint, not just from a filmmaking standpoint or an acting standpoint, where we say who gets to say what.
Yeah.
And I think I should be allowed to write about this movie and say, this is how I reflect on what it's trying to say, and you know, how it sort of defines that sense of identity, and also it's a historical movie, and I don't know that director, so yeah, I think that would be good.
Cool. Yeah, I look forward to that, because I haven't seen that, so I'm going to watch that before the end of the month as well. It's not one of the ones that I watched in preparation for the conversation or since.
Sorry, that was a big ramble by me. I hope
No, it's
okay.
lovely, you know, like, and it's lovely that it brought out so much, that, and it obviously it made me think of when we met, you know, because you sort of said about like studying sort of film studies, and sort of, you know, and queer theory in film, in that, but also when we met, you were teaching gender and sexuality module, and I think maybe the first class I did when I joined Falmouth was one of your seminars, and you just said, "I'll come in and sit," and I came in, and I can't remember the film we were talking about, but it was one of your gender and sexuality seminars. So yeah, and it's a foundational part of modern film studies, sort of gender and sexuality. But what's interesting about that Ryan's book is how much of it's at the level of form and not subject. Which feels like it's a really kind of vital addition to the conversation.
But also very refreshing, considering that is not what most of it is now.
Yeah.
You know, because I think early queer theory was very much, there was a lot of form, and also how to read the form. Is really important. And he mentioned the the seminal book that he mentioned that's just completely gone out of my head now. Anyway,
do
you remember what
the Celluloid Closet?
Celluloid Closet, that's it. Which I've read years ago. But it's interesting that sort of take on it. His sort of, you know, it's really important, but there are things here that I think have moved to a different place. And also, what's really interesting is that I'm doing a lot of external examining this particular week as well, and there is a lot of people who are writing about the trans issue, but they're not engaging with form.
No, you
know,
and it's a shame, because I think there's some really interesting. I just saw that one of the films he mentions in the book, is called Death and Bowling, and that's just popped up on Prime, so I'm going to watch that. But I did see Orlando, My Political Biography, which is on.
Oh right, okay.
Which is a Paul P. Preciado film where a significant number of trans people engage with Virginia Woolf's Orlando.
Yep,
it's such a beautiful film, and they all declare, like, this is my name, and in this film I'm playing Orlando. Like, it's so playful and smart and interesting. At the level of form of just like, oh, you know, it could be so straightforward and very, very kind of didactic, but it's not. So yeah, I think it was really kind of lovely to engage with it in that way. Again, because of the timing for us in terms of the podcast, in terms of it's been a preoccupation a lot recently. Like, can we just talk about? Not can we just talk about? Can we talk more about, or can we be led by form rather than what is the very kind of rigid politics that, you know, and a lot of the films have a kind of messiness to them because they're formally led rather than, you know, just thinking about what's the position that needs to be taken, which makes them really cinematic as well.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to note as well, which kind of made me thinking back on that conversation when you started, was that Ryan and I were on the stage and we were looking out towards the rake seating,
right?
You know, which I think is such in terms of the conversation, but just our conversation as well, in terms of, it's such an interesting viewpoint to be in front of the screen thinking about ourselves as audience members, but the idea of the audience by looking at the empty seats in a way that it shifted, certainly in my sort of engagement, away from just thinking about these as kinds of texts which we all look at, but also the experience of being an audience member, being a spectator, and the role that plays in all of this. So that was really lovely that we were sat on the stage and not in the seats. Yeah,
very good. Yeah, so what I wanted to ask, just as the sort of rounding off for the whole episode, really, is we both watched End of the Century, which is the film that you were talking about at the end of the conversation. But I'm interested to hear what you think. But did you speak to Ryan about what was it about that film? Because he didn't really say that on. You were going in to talk about it, so maybe you could do a quick one on what Ryan's thing is about this movie from the book, kind of from the book, and then what your take was on the film.
Yeah. So when I realized that I was going to do the taping, so I think I mentioned this, but when I realized I was going to do the taping at the Barbican before that screening of the film, I didn't finish the book because it's the last chapter. So I hadn't and I hadn't seen the film. So I was like, well, I get to see the film. So I can see the film and then I can read the chapter and then and sort of finish the book. And I was just really interested in like why end the book with this film. And in the book he talks about, and this is interesting in terms of like what you were just saying about that the being okay in the film, is that in the book he goes to the locations and he spends time with one of the actors who takes him around these locations, and he has this really, really lovely experience where there's these kind of like almost happenstance kind of kismet moments of connection with the actor, who like notes something in his notebook and it sparks something, and then something happens when they're Ryan sent me a picture in the film. The two men share a kind of like wine and cheese on this
on the veranda or whatever.
And Ryan asked the actor, I think it's Raoul, to take him there, and he had his picture taken like the still from the film, which is really lovely. And then something happens there which kind of feels like it's almost from the film. And Ryan's in the Q&A after the screening, Ryan sort of said like he just wants to be in the film. This was a film for him where it was like he went to Barcelona and wanted to live in this movie because it was so, and when he was sort of talking about how for him he uses like queer cinema as the term because of this kind of idea of the form, and that you feel the queerness in the way that the story is told, in the filmmaking, in this kind of very kind of unstable and there's I can't remember the words he used, but there's something going on in the form of the film which feels like it's representative of the instability and the yearning and the a lot of the kind of not isolation but just sort of the disconnect that you can be felt, and that you have to kind of work through from that very, very specific position that you have inside, and that this film does something really, really beautiful in terms of the way it tells its story, which kind of captures that. And it's just a really beautiful story about love and memory and the past and lives not lived, and how you feel when you sort of look back on those choices and the choice to be who you are and who you are at different points. But I think what's interesting in terms of it's about reflection, and sort of these two characters talk about their past, and I think a lot of it feels very similar in terms of what Ryan's talked about in terms of how you become the gay person, or how you become the queer person, or the lesbian, or whatever it is, how you end up in that. If you are fortunate enough to end up in that space, in terms of the ability to live the life that feels who you are the most, but how there's the steps you take along the way, which are not necessary. You don't. No one really does this in terms of, you were right in terms of identity, but you don't emerge fully formed. It's a journey to get somewhere, and even then it's not finished. And the film is very, very not finished as well.
And you also don't know whether it was right or not.
No, and the film
you know what I mean?
is about that. Like there's so much going on. So yeah, that was why, and why obviously he was talking about the film, because it's a very, very important film to him, and to the book, and to this kind of understanding of queerness that he's kind of talking about. So yeah, and again, part of it was like, I get to see this at the cinema for the first time, which was really exciting.
I bet it's good in the cinema because it is one of those meditative kind of experiences, especially, well, all of it really. I mean, like the first 20 odd minutes, there's not a word uttered.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah, it's not Dardenne kind of realism, but there's an observational element to it.
Yeah,
and what I liked as well, it's a sort of, there's a matter of factness to both the way that the gay relationships are talked about, and they just talk about what they do in a way that doesn't that you realize that there are different sets of principles than what an ordinary straight relationship would talk in the way they would be talked about.
Yeah.
You know, like
yeah.
I don't want to go into that because whoever wants to, it's on Prime. Watch it.
Yeah.
You'll get what we're saying here. Yeah. So, and I liked some of the. I liked a lot of the conversations, and just for their own sake, you know, that sort of sense of questioning forgetting who you are as the lone individual when you're in a relationship. I think it was an interesting one. And the labor of those relationships. I think there's quite a lot of films out, right? I mean, I know this is 2019, but there's a lot of films that are sort of talking about that.
Yeah.
Right now, you know, that I think that a lot of filmmakers are very interested in that idea of the propaganda of romantic love, let's say,
Yeah.
and the way that's, you know, the fundamental to kind of straight storytelling in Hollywood, you know, historically, right?
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to reduce it, but it was interesting to me. You sort of conceptualize what kind of film is this, and it was almost in my head. It suddenly quickly formed. It was like All of Us Strangers meets Before Midnight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In terms of the time, there are flashbacks, but they're not organized or signposted in a way that's easy.
Yeah.
You know, and actually, you get to the point. Is this happening in the past or is it happening now?
Yeah.
And then what's interesting, again, I think that from the stuff that I've read as well, and a lot of the cinema that I've watched on the back of the reading, you realize that sort of queer cinema is very much interested in unsentimentalizing sex, and not necessarily sensationalizing. Although this is a part of queer cinema, you know, making it looks sexual so it can be arousing in that sense.
Yeah.
But I don't think this is about that. There is a matter of factness in the way that the form of, in the way that it's shot, and the way that it's cut away as well. It's kind of like, here's how it happened, and then here's the next scene, the aftermath of it. And I think that it's interesting how the way that it's shot is links to the way that the emotional states of the protagonists speak to each other afterwards in a matter of fact way, which is interesting.
That's nice. Yeah.
And I love that moment as well about that text across the screen moment out of nowhere. That sort of idea about transition and perpetual freedom, that really struck a chord with me.
Yeah.
Because I just kind of like, I'm a person who sort of really loves the process of traveling.
Yeah.
To the point that I will go to the airport or the railway station like 2 hours before, just so I can be there.
Yeah.
You know, and have the full experience. Yeah, so and all of that stuff about the sliding doors moment, I think he's done in an interesting way. And yeah, I can see why. You know, it's like when I say, you know, I always, when I get on a train, I wonder whether Julie Delpy, the cipher of her will turn up that I can talk to. You know, but
we all hope.
But do you see what I mean? It's like you want to be in that movie.
Yeah.
You know, I do. I want to be in that situation in that movie.
Yeah.
And I can see why Ryan says that about this film.
Yeah. No, I think I certainly felt that watching it, that it was a kind of like the before trilogy. And the Hague thing is interesting because in the book, All of Us Strangers, it comes towards the end, and he has a conversation with Andrew Hague at the Barbican, just before the end of the book, which is lovely again, which was a nice reason to do it there. But I rewatched Weekend as part of this, and I was like, that feels like a very, very similar film, as you say, in terms of like there's a kind of romantic yearning, but it's not straight, and also there is a matter of factness to the sex, but the sex is also a way of having a conversation that's about those characters. It's not about announcing a gayness. It's about saying, you know, these are these people, and this is how they relate to each other and how they relate to sex and as part of their life, which I think was really, really refreshing. So yeah, it felt like before films, and also that kind of like slow indie movie where people just sort of wander around and chat and like drink, and you know, Oh, one of the things. So this, I'm going to mention this because this was wild in the Q&A. So absolutely random. There's a scene in the film where the two men in the past, although it takes you a while to realize they're actually in the past because there's no real signifiers. You just have to kind of work.
I had to rewind twice because you know what it's like at home. You don't fully focus the same at cinema. I had to go back. Oh, are they in the past now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So in the film, they do go in the past, but the actors don't change.
No, that's the thing.
They even kind of look a bit older in a close up, which is a kind of weird. There's a kind of close up of one of the characters when that transition's made, and they really make a point of his kind of graying beard as if he's almost older in the past. It's really, really beautifully done. But there's a scene where they kind of get drunk and dance and fool around and then end up having sex. And the song that plays in the film is a Space Age love song by Flock of Seagulls. So what was amazing was that someone in the audience, I think it was a film critic, and I recognized their voice, and I was like, that voice seems familiar. I think he's a critic on radio or something like that. Said, what's it like seeing the film with that song? Because I've seen it with a different song. And everyone was like, what? And Ryan was like, what? And he said, I've seen the film twice, and in both versions, it's a different Flock of Seagulls song called I Ran, which is a very famous Flock of Seagulls song. And it's and I worked this out. I said, I look after this. It's next to the song that we saw it with on the album, on the Flock of Seagulls album. And he was adamant. He said, yeah, and we looked it up, and we Shazammed it, and we kind of because we hadn't heard it. And it's definitely a different song to the one in that film. And what's interesting is that the context of the two songs could not be more different.
Oh, okay.
So if you hear, in terms of those characters as well, the idea of I ran away from this thing, and the other one is very much like the best love of my life, so so that was just really interesting. And we were kind of pondering, is that because it was a festival run and then they changed it for, they couldn't get the rights for that, but it was just such an interesting thing that you have this, again, everyone's watching the same film, but one thing has shifted it into being a very different experience for people. It was just kind of wild, and that sort of became this really interesting conversation again, which in this film where the versions of lives are very, very much things that you are thinking about. And then to know that there's this other version of this film,
yep,
which has this very, very pivotal scene being very, very different context was kind of, just kind of amazing. And again, just added something to that Q&A where you're like, oh, this feels like it's a very specific, special thing, which again, made me really grateful to be in the cinema for it rather than watching it on a screener. Because it just added another layer of specialness to it.
Yeah. So you can check that out. It is on Amazon Prime. And if you listen to this, it will really enhance your listening, I would say. Yeah. And just to say, obviously, thanks for the conversation, but thanks for, just allowing us to dedicate it to Barney and to being a supporter of the podcast over the years as well. And sort of always sort of coming back. And I know you know him more than I don't know him at all, but he clearly understands the show and wants to speak on it, which is always nice,
Yeah, no, it's been it's been a really lovely experience to take the conversation and put this episode together, and even under the circumstances, it feels like a real honor and really grateful to be able to do this in a tiny way. So thank you, Ryan, for having the conversation and then kind of asking us to put it out in this way, where the episode is dedicated to Barney.
Okay, so I think we're going to go over and tape a bonus now. We're going to talk a little bit about more personal stuff, some news to announce, for me anyway, and I think we'll chat about what you've seen, maybe a couple of things I've seen, and maybe talk about this my latest Substack post. So as always, thank you for listening. This has been the Cinematologists Podcast.